without due process, you have no way to maintain your innocence, which means without due process, if they can do this to people justifiably because they're, been taken down and can be called tren de agua, you can be called tren de agua as well. Now, there's no due process. All right. We're moving on to immigration because that is also an environment where clearly the Trump administration is doing a lot. Okay. Sorry, I was looking at something.
Salvador, the president there said he would be willing to take American citizens in the federal prison population. Is that one of the ideas they're going to be discussing?
Well, I love that. If we could take some of our 20-time wise guys that push people into subways and that hit people over the back of the head and that purposely run people over in cars, if he would take them, I'd be honored to give them. I don't know what the law says on that, but I can't imagine the law would say anything different. If they can house these horrible criminals for a lot less money than it costs us, I'm all for it. But I'd only do according to the law. But I have suggested that, why should it stop just at people that cross the border illegally? We have some horrible criminals, American grown and born. And if we have somebody that bops an old woman over the head, if we have somebody that is in jail 20 times and goes back and shoots people all over the place and then has a bad judge or a bad prosecutor that do nothing about him, all they worry about is politics, and don't worry about that. I think if we could...
Yeah, notice how he's making this shit up? It's just completely made up. Yeah, what if a guy was just like assassinating people 10 times a day? And then a judge was like, I'm gay and woke. Are you undocumented? Well, I can't send you to prison, nor can I deport you. And then he came out of that situation, came out of that detainment, and then started assassinating 20 people a day. What if that happened? You wouldn't want to deport that guy. It's like, okay, what if a guy had a nuke? Like, what do you mean? What if he had superpowers? Like, what are you saying? So stupid.
Could get El Salvador or somebody, but to take them, I'd be very happy with it. But I have to...
Yeah, he wants to send Americans there too. Anyway, Maryland reacts as Supreme Court halts man's return from mistaken deportation. The U.S. Supreme Court allowed President Trump to enforce the Alien Enemies Act for rapid deportations for now, handing the White House a significant victory, and also undermining the American Constitution and any sort of power that the judiciary had. Ironically enough, the Supreme Court, the highest form of the judiciary, not operating on the best interest of the separation of powers, has decided to basically allow the Trump administration to implement his Nazi eroding precedent. And I'm invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 because we are being invaded and it's a war at this point. Really, and Joe Biden, listen, Joe Biden, he did this. Well, it's awful Joe Biden did, blah, blah, blah. Simplified SCOTUS. This is totally normal. Just give the deportees a court date in Texas, and I think we'll just let things happen. Pay no attention to dissenters. Okay, yeah. Supreme Court allows Trump to enforce Alien Enemies Act for rapid deportations for now. This is a horrifying move. Obviously, it's probably the biggest thing that they did today, even in spite of all the tariffs. This is more significant than the tariffs and the economic hardships that they're going to cause. Straight up. This is the judiciary allowing for this administration to do Nazi. Remember what I told you? Like, the courts were seen as the only setback against this administration. We are now moving in the direction where the laws will be used against the people. Once you set the precedent, you then use the existing law. Now we move away from legality to the morality of the situation, because up until this moment, it was not legal. The Supreme Court has now made it legal. Before it was illegal and immoral. Now it is legal and immoral. Awful decision, but there's an extremely important caveat. SCOTUS says, but offers no way to require the government to do this, and we know this is largely toothless, that anyone subject to the law must get notice and time to file a habeas lawsuit. Innocents will be harmed. I mean, considering that they already caved to the administration on this, there's no reason that they will ever follow up with this. Yeah, next decision that comes down the line will be like, okay, I guess there is no reason. There is no notice in time to file a habeas lawsuit. Okay. Do you think the conservative justices understand the historical weight of their decisions in a case like this, or do you think they just don't give a I think they don't give a I think they understand it and like it, or they understand it and don't give a probably the first one, though. I think they understand the weight of the historical decisions that they're making, and they're fascist monsters, and they like it. They like that they're moving the nation in this direction. Yeah. Here.
At 6, the U.S. Supreme Court hands the Trump administration a temporary victory, ruling that a Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador does not have to be returned to the United States.
Remember, this is a person that went through the American justice system and got a withholding, which has a higher standard, a higher burden, a higher standard to clear in an effort to get a withholding of removal from this state, from this nation state. So when the Trump administration actually went out and removed him from this country and sent him directly to El Salvador, they violated the law. Not only did they violate the law, but they also admitted that they violated the law. They were like, oops, we f***ed up. And their defense, no, he's not an illegal immigrant. No. A withholding for a removal is an important part of being able to get legal permanent residency. It is illegal for him to be removed from the country unless he's done something like heinous, but he had not, obviously. We're talking about him like not specifically being here as an illegal immigrant or whatever. I'm talking like straight up. He went through the asylum process and was on his pathway to getting a citizenship. He has a legal right to be here. They just grabbed him. They deported him to El Salvador specifically and used a confidential informant that basically lied about him being an MS-13 gang member that was later looked at by another judge who was like, yeah, this has no bones. Like, this is just a made up thing. And the reason why it was a made up thing is because that CI, or not CI, but like they did a random Home Depot dragnet where one of the dudes there was like, oh, this guy's actually MS-13 in New York. He had never been in New York. And a second judge that overlooked that case realized that it was just a ridiculous accusation. And on top of that, all of the other evidence that they compiled in the process showed that he had reason to not be removed from this country. And yet, the Department of Homeland Security still black-bagged him and shipped him to El Salvador. His wife didn't know that he was shipped to El Salvador. They didn't know where he was until the Salvadoran government posted a Twitter video where his wife literally saw his neck tattoo and was like, oh my God, that's my husband that was kidnapped. In that process, the administration itself recognized that they had up by deporting this person, but then they, one, lied and said, nah, he's MS-13, which was a lie, straight up lie. Then they doubled down and said, not only is he MS-13, which is a lie, but also on top of that, we can't bring him back, which is also a lie. The idea that the American government has never actually wrongly deported someone and then never brought them back is wrong. The American government has wrongly deported people in the past. The American government has also, in that process, when found to be in the wrong, has brought back those people that they have falsely deported. But they claim that this government that we're paying $6 million to warehouse these undocumented migrants and documented legal permanent residents and potentially even American citizens in the future, we have no power over them. We have no power over bringing them back into the United States of America. It's completely made up.
Earlier, Kilmara Abrego Garcia's wife spoke directly to President Trump, saying she hoped her children would be reunited with their father tonight. That will not happen. The Chief Justice himself issued the order, saying he wants more arguments in the case. A victory for the Trump administration, a 3-sentence order from the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, ruling the government does not have to bring Kilmara Abrego Garcia back to the United States tonight.
The Supreme Court overturned a lower court's decision to bring this person who was illegally sent to El Salvador back. The Supreme Court looked at that and said, nah, they can do it. This is a major, major precedent. It is a major violation of the power of the judiciary because the nation's highest court is completely on board with the administration.
weeks after immigration officials admitted mistakenly deporting him from Maryland to a violent Salvadoran prison. It goes against lower court rulings.
We have judges that try and protect these people, but they didn't protect us when the people were being let in. But to get them out is never easy with these people.
He is an MS-13.
My understanding is that, yes, he shouldn't be deported, but specifically he shouldn't be deported to El Salvador because he would be in a lot of danger. Like if they deport him, they have to do it somewhere else, anywhere else. Dude, if you're from El Salvador and you get a withholding to be deported to El Salvador, that means don't deport this person. You understand that, right? Where else is the government supposed to deport someone from El Salvador to? That's not how that works. Like, are we just deporting people randomly to other countries? I mean, we have done that in the past, and it's a horrific thing that we did. And it's also hilarious because like that means there is a higher standard for withholding than a straightforward asylum seeker claim. Like there is a higher standard to maintain a withholding, to develop a decision on withholding rather than give like someone a straightforward asylum claim.
Gang member.
Attorney General Pam Bondi again called Abrego Garcia an MS-13 gang member despite the government presenting no evidence in court, and defended putting the prosecutor who argued the case in Maryland Friday on administrative leave. Yeah, they fired, or they also reprimanded the attorney, the government prosecutor that admitted basically to the mistake that they had made.
He shouldn't have taken the case. He shouldn't have argued it if that's what he was going to do.
The case has drawn outrage, with Abrego Garcia's supporters rallying around him. A Maryland federal judge blasted the government, calling the mistaken deportation a grievous error, and ruling there were no legal...
By the way, the reason why they made this grievous error is because there was no due process either. Like, no judge. Even if they went to a judge that is like incredibly reactionary, even the most right-wing judge probably would not have let this guy get deported. Maybe he would have let every other guy get deported, but not this dude. You see what I'm saying? Like, no matter how racist they are, this is a direct violation of a previous court ruling. There's too much evidence to suggest that this person should not be deported.
Legal grounds whatsoever for his arrest, detention, or removal. His detention appears wholly lawless. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld that decision, writing, Abrego Garcia has no criminal history in this country or anywhere else, and is a gainfully employed family man who lives a law-abiding and productive life. Maryland Congressman Glenn Ivey.
But it should send a message, I hope, to the Trump administration that you can't just go around grabbing people, and once you realize that you've made a mistake, don't double down on it.
The Solicitor General wrote in a successful appeal to the Supreme Court, the United States does not control the sovereign nation of El Salvador, nor can it compel...
It didn't send that message to the Trump administration, because the Trump administration got the exact opposite message, because the Supreme Court is like, nah, you can do that.
El Salvador to follow a federal judge's bidding.
As a former prosecutor who's handled immigration cases, have you ever seen a case like this?
I don't think I've ever seen a scenario where the Department of Justice acknowledges it made a mistake.
Yeah, this is I believe this is the first time, as far as I understand. I was reading some immigration attorneys and like people that have successfully litigated matters like this. This is the first time where the administration recognizes they made a mistake and does not go back and return the wronged party to U.S. soil. Because like, mistakes like this have happened, even with due process, of course. Even when someone goes through the court process and then they are found to be wrongfully deported from this country, even if they were initially deported, the government will go back and extract that person and bring that person back to U.S. soil. This has happened in immigration history in the United States of America. This is the first time where the government's like, yeah, we know he should not have been deported to El Salvador. It is literally illegal for us to deport him to El Salvador, and we're still not going to bring him back.
But then says there's nothing they can do to fix it. At a minimum, we should be able to get back a person who hasn't been proven guilty of anything, at least so far, that the government's alleged, so he can have his day in court.
The Chief Justice says lawyers haven't
not overturned yet. It's an administrative stay for more ruling time for the court. They can still allow him to come back or not. Everything I've read said it's a stay, not an actual ruling on Garcia's case yet, I thought. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. Like, oh, they're blocking the court order requiring his return in order to give more time.
Till tomorrow at 5 p.m. to file further arguments in the case. In your corner downtown, Mike Helgren, WJZ.
All right, thank you, Mike.
The article says that he deserves due process just in the state of Texas, not Washington. Let me see an article on it. Let me read it. I might have misunderstood it. Yeah. The other court decision that came down is this one is actually tied to the El Salvadoran people that are sorry, the Venezuelan people. This decision, that's what I'm mistaking it with. The Supreme Court overturned the lower court's block on Venezuelan deportations. This one is a much larger victory for the Trump administration. This is the other one that is far worse. The Supreme Court on Monday allowed President Donald Trump to enforce the Alien Enemies Act for now, handing the White House a significant victory that will let the immigration officials rely on a sweeping wartime authority to rapidly deport alleged gang members. The unsigned decision in the case, the most closely watched emergency appeal pending at the Supreme Court, lets Trump invoke the 1798 law to speed removals while litigation over the act's use plays out in lower courts. The court stressed that people deported going forward should receive notice that they are subject to the act and an opportunity to have their removal reviewed. The court's 3 liberal justices dissented from the decision, and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, a member of the court's conservative wing, partially dissented. Trump framed his emergency appeal as a fight over judicial power, and specifically the U.S. District Judge James Boasberg's order that temporarily blocked the president from enforcing the Alien Enemies Act against 5 Venezuelans who sued and a broader class of people who might be affected. In other words, anyone else. This is a path of perfect lawlessness. Court condemns Trump over wrongful deportation. Chief Justice John Roberts put a temporary stay on a lower court order requiring the Trump administration to return a wrongfully deported Salvadoran immigrant to the U.S. by midnight Monday. Roberts' stay came hours after a 3-judge panel for the 4th U.S. Circuit District Court of Appeals unanimously rejected the Trump administration's request to overturn it. And then it went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court's administrative stay gives justices additional time to rule on the dispute. The United States government has no legal authority to snatch a person who is unlawfully present in the United States off the street and remove him from the country without due process, the court ruled. The government's contention otherwise, and its argument that the federal courts are powerless to intervene, are unconscionable. It is an administrative stay, as in they will overlook the case. But considering this is how they ruled in favor, like they blocked the lower court, they overturned the lower court's block on Venezuelan deportations. The circuit court ruled that, not Supreme Court. Is confusing in this article. Wait, what am I not understanding? President Donald Trump last month invoked the Alien Enemies Act. The U.S. government claimed that those deported members are Tren-de-Aragua. This is 2 separate court cases. This is, 2 separate court cases in front of us. Okay, two separate decisions. One is Judge Boasberg, I think I'm saying his name right, that said, you are not allowed to deport these 5 Venezuelans without due process. The Trump administration says, sucks to suck, we already deported them. Okay? The Supreme Court looked at that decision and overturned the lower court's block on the deportations and said, you can deport these people. Why does any of this matter, though? If they send them to a sovereign nation, what power do they have to force them to hand over someone they willingly took into their prison? What do you mean? First of all, we're talking about America versus El Salvador. America has all the power in the world against El Salvador, considering that America is paying El Salvador to even house these people. But even if they weren't paying El Salvador, we could just say, hey, give us this person back. And El Salvador would be like, oh, of course. As a matter of fact, that is precisely what has happened in the past. People have been wrongfully deported from this country after they were found in a court to be eligible for deportation. And then they've successfully sued the government. And the government realized that they erroneously sent someone overseas, sent them or deported them, and have actually brought back those people to U.S. soil. It happens. This is the first instance where it's not happening. If the Trump admin doesn't want to take them back, though, they clearly don't care about the courts anyway. I know, but what do you want me to do? Not cover the story and not talk about how insane this is? Okay, well, the Trump administration clearly doesn't care about the courts, so there's no reason to talk about the Supreme Court also in an effort to, I guess, maintain the strength of the institutions is voluntarily deciding on behalf of the administration so that there isn't a constitutional crisis. if the Trump administration doesn't follow through on the Supreme Court decision. Oh, did the Supreme Court just ignore the Constitution and federal law in order to help their own political faction? Who could have predicted this? Left-wing legal scholars. Abrego Garcia, Maryland resident working as a sheet metal apprentice, wife and a 5-year-old child who are both U.S. citizens. He has never even been charged with a crime in the U.S., El Salvador, or any other country. ICE arrested him on March 12th. The Trump administration has repeatedly alleged without showing powers. Before the fourth, which is, again, 100% correct. Okay? The Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals made the right decision following the separation of powers and following the pre-existing rules on this matter. This is what has happened historically when someone has been deported, someone has been falsely deported from the United States of America, the American government goes and returns them. There's never been a reason to defy this process. The Trump administration chose to defy the process, and the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals also was asked to basically stop the demand being made from the lower court, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Before the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals issued his ruling on Monday, the Trump administration appealed it to the Supreme Court. In the government's application to SCOTUS, Solicitor General Dean Sauer claimed that the U.S. should not have to return Abrego Garcia because he's a verified member of MS-13. No evidence whatsoever for this. As a matter of fact, only evidence to suggest he is not a member of MS-13. Remember, because he already has a withholding. The Fourth U.S. Circuit panel noted that the Department of Justice presented no evidence that Abrego Garcia was a member of the gang. It also noted that Abrego Garcia was accused of being a member of the gang's arm in New York, where he has never lived. They do a dragnet on Home Depot a couple of years ago, where one of the dudes falsely claims that Abrego Garcia is an MS-13 member from New York. Abrego Garcia has never been in New York. He's never been in New York. So it's just completely made up, which is precisely the reason why a court in the past overthrew that initial charge and offered him a withholding. The reason why they offered him a withholding, as we look through the court, as we look through the court case that decided to give him a withholding, was because he was being threatened by MS-13 because of his family's like food stands. Him and his family were being threatened by MS-13, as in he should not be removed from the country, and especially not to El Salvador, because he is directly, according to the American justice system, the American justice system has established that his life would be in danger if he was sent back to El Salvador. There's no question the government screwed up here, Circuit Judge Harvey Wilkinson, who was appointed by the former President Ronald Reagan, wrote. The withholding of removal order was country-specific. It banned the government from removing Abrego to El Salvador and El Salvador only. Wilkinson said, granting the Trump admin's request would create a loophole through which it could whisk individuals to foreign prisons in violation of court orders and then contend, invoking its Article 2 powers, that it is no longer their custodian and there is nothing that can be done. It takes no small amount of imagination to understand that it is a path of perfect lawlessness, one that courts cannot condone, Wilkinson said. You understand? The El Salvador part of this process is even scarier than Guantanamo Bay, because Guantanamo Bay is still, it's not on U.S. soil, so they can violate your laws or violate your habeas corpus and numerous other human rights laws. But because Guantanamo Bay is still managed by the American military, your lawyer can go there, your lawyer can talk to you, you can still be, you can still leave Guantanamo Bay. If the Trump administration just simply claims, once we deport you, it's over, it's even worse than Guantanamo Bay in the sense that now you're being sent to El Salvador, and the Trump administration is falsely claiming that they cannot extract these people back. They cannot bring these people back. This is insane. It is completely and utterly insane. And the other decision is that the lower court had put a stay on the deportations of some of these Venezuelans that were sent to El Salvador. And the Trump administration asked the justice to weigh in after a federal judge paused the president's use of a wartime power law to deport Venezuelans that accused of being gang members. And the Supreme Court ruled on Monday night that the Trump administration could continue to deport Venezuelan migrants based on a Wartime Powers Act for now, overturning a lower court that had put a temporary stop to the deportations. This is a major victory for the Nazi regime, a major victory for the fascists. It is the court system just basically shredding what remains of the separation of powers and what remains of their interest in following the letter of the law. It means that they are caving. It means that they're showing their bellies or rather, they had all this appetite for this violence to begin with, and they're following through on this agenda. If they can do this, by the way, paired up with the other decision, they can basically do this for anybody with no interest in returning them either. American citizens. Remember, Donald Trump has said he wants to do this to American citizens as well. And now that we are maintaining that, like, once the person is out of our hands and in El Salvador, there's not anything that we can do, you can do that to an American citizen and basically make them not a citizen anymore. Make them a slave to the CCOT facility. The decision marks a victory for the Trump administration, although the ruling is narrow and focused on the proper venue for the cases, rather than on the administration's use of a centuries-old law to justify its decision to send plane loads of Venezuelans to El Salvador with little to no due process. This is cope. Okay? The narrow framework doesn't mean anything because they will serially keep violating it, and some judges will continue trying to stop this process, and slowly but surely, the Supreme Court will consistently give the administration everything it wants because this is a major violation, and the Supreme Court basically overturned it. The Supreme Court took away the power of the courts. The justices did not address the question of whether the Trump administration improperly categorized the Venezuelans as deportable under the Alien Enemies Act, finding the migrants had improperly challenged their deportations in Washington, D.C. The justices determined that the migrants should have raised the challenges in Texas where they were being held. It's just like such a cowardly, annoying, process-focused way to, one, simultaneously save face, while two, allowing this administration to continue its deportation agenda. And the reason why they did that was because they did not want there to be a potential constitutional crisis. The detainees are confined in Texas, so venue is improper in the District of Columbia, according to the court's order, which was brief and unsigned, as is typical in such emergency applications. In a concurrence, Justice Brett Kavanaugh stressed that the justices were in agreement that the migrants should receive judicial review, but that they were divided over where the case should be heard. As the court stresses, the court's disagreement with the dissenters is not over whether the detainees receive judicial review for their transfers. All 9 members of the court agree that judicial review is available. The only question is where that judicial review should occur. They did this thing in the most cowardly way possible, where they wanted to come across like they are, because if they had supported the lower court's decision here, as is what was expected, right? Under normal circumstances, they should have. Then the Trump administration would find themselves in this constitutional crisis where they had to admit that they made a mistake and go back and extract these people and put them through due process, in which you would most likely find out that they didn't even have any criminal charges. Maybe one of them only had criminal charges and was deportable, but the other ones weren't. You know what I mean? It would be a long, convoluted, drawn-out process that would make the administration look bad. There'd be media coverage on it. There'd be a lot of back and forth where the messaging would absolutely hammer these guys. It would put the dangerous immigration agenda in the forefront of people's consciousness. So instead of allowing that to happen, the Supreme Court found a cowardly way. The Supreme Court found a cowardly way to say, we don't want to have a constitutional crisis here, and we don't want to embarrass the administration. So we're just going to find a process-centered way of just saying the lower court that gave this decision has no power over it. Okay? The institutionalists on the court just want this to run to the Fifth Circuit where they were being held, which ICE moved to have a better ruling. That fits the precedent on immigration issues as well. No, I'm saying that in and of itself is quite literally a way to pass the buck down and to ensure that they get out of this, they concede to the Trump agenda on deportations without triggering a constitutional crisis. That's what I'm saying. Texas courts or Louisiana courts, there's a reason why ICE rapidly will ship people after black bagging them to Louisiana, because they know that the judges in Louisiana have this long, arduous process where they will either keep someone in detention for as long as they can, which is another way to torture these people, or expeditiously ship them out of the country and sign off on a deportation when most other judges would not. Problem here is that this was a federal immigration judge that intervened in the process and issued a court order. And the Trump administration refused to follow the court order. So the Supreme Court either was going to say, yeah, you have to listen to a federal judge on immigration when they give you a court order, and then embarrass the Trump administration or even undermine their mass deportation agenda. Or they could find a process-focused way to move, a process-focused way in which they're not saying like judicial review is gone, okay? But simply you did the wrong, like this judge didn't have power over this. Only the state where they were held, do the federal judges have power over it? The administration has asked the justice to weigh in on its effort to use the Alien Enemies Act to deport more than 100 Venezuelans to a prison in El Salvador. The administration claims the migrants are all members of Tren de Agua, a violent street gang rooted in Venezuela, and that their removals are allowed under the act, which grants the president authority to detain or deport citizens of enemy nations. The president may invoke the law in times of declared war or when a foreign government invades the United States. I want to mention something here. Nazis in the United States of America during World War II did not have their due process violated. Nazis in the Nuremberg trials did not have their due process violated. Nazis during the Nuremberg trials deliberately were put through, remember the documentary that we watched, not a mock trial in the same way that Stalin was engaging in, but instead a real court where their death sentences were dished out after due process went through, after they went through the entire court proceedings. So this means that random gay Venezuelan barbers that are being called Tren de Agua, which is now considered a terror group, are unironically getting processed and deported and have a worse go in front of the law in 2025 than the Nazis did in both Nuremberg and also prior to Nuremberg in the United States of America during World War II. That is crazy. And if anyone has no due process, that means no one has due process. Without due process, you have no way to maintain your innocence, which means without due process, if they can do this to people unjustifiably because they're, Venezuelan and previously on temporary protected status, under simply the suspicion that they are brown and can be called Tren de Agua, you can be called Tren de Agua as well. There's no due process, so it doesn't matter. When there's no due process, that means anyone and everyone can be considered a Tren de Agua terrorist that can be expeditiously shipped out to a slave labor camp without the government's, without any sort of extraction in the aftermath if we find out that we deported the wrong guy. Do you understand why these two court decisions play hand in hand and create an incredibly dangerous scenario for every American? So when you say this can't happen to me, understand that it very well can happen to you. No one is safe.